Morning.
Disconnect your phone.
Good morning.
So if you'd like to rename and put your pronouns, would be really useful. This is Sarah speaking. Welcome everybody. It's 10 o'clock. Welcome to Inclusive Cultures. This is Sarah speaking. It's fantastic to see you and all your faces. It suddenly becomes real. I'm going to hand over to Kate Atkinson, who is going to kick us off this morning for this seminar 1 of Inclusive Cultures 3. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Sarah. A very warm welcome, and it is a warm welcome this morning because it's a lovely hot sunny day where I am, certainly in South East London, and I hope it's lovely where you are too. Wonderful to see you all. A very warm welcome to this, the first of our sessions together. I'm Kate Atkinson, and for those of you who I haven't met previously, I'm Head of Programmes at Claw Leadership, and it's really lovely to be joining with you on this journey as part of Inclusive Cultures 3. Myself and my colleague Lucy will be here throughout, and we're actually in the session with you. So if you've got any technical issues as well as you go, please do pop us a message in the chat. A couple of housekeeping things before we get going. We have got captions for today's session. So if you want to access the captions, you can do so in 2 ways. There's a text on tap link, which I'm just going to paste into the chat for you now. Somebody's muted me, I'm not quite sure what happened there. Or you're also able to access them through the closed caption button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. So please do access them in either way. And for those of you who've specifically requested access to captions in advance, we will have captioners with you in your breakout groups. So just to flag that they will travel with you to your breakout groups as well. We also have a note taker who's working in the space with us, and she's going to be writing pricing notes for us, and they will be emailed to you at the beginning of next week once we've had a chance to kind of just proof them for you. And that is a summary of the main session discussions as well. So that's hopefully useful just so that you're able to see the flow of conversation in the sessions today. We will be recording the session as well, again, as a sort of memory reference if you want to kind of look back at sections as well. And that will come to you as part of the resources again at the beginning of next week. So you will have that to be able to refer back to as well. And just to say, this is the first of our sessions together. Lucy and I will be in the space. If you're having any tech issues, if your Wi-Fi's got any gremlins, Lucy's just waving there. She's sitting there in the background. Any Wi-Fi gremlins, or you need any support from any of us today, you can identify members of the Inclusive Cultures team by IC. We've all got our names with IC at the beginning in our Zoom boxes. So please do pop us a message and we will try and assist. Lucy and I are here to help on any tech issues. As always, when we're working on Zoom, if we can ask you just to help us with the flow of conversation to keep yourselves on mute unless you're speaking within the breakout groups. And you're absolutely welcome to paste thoughts and reflections into the chat as you go, and we will kind of read those out if we're kind of sharing back, or we will continue to speak them loud if you prefer. So yeah, I think that's it for housekeeping from me. But for Claw Leadership, this is a really exciting program. This is the 3rd iteration of this program, and it's a really important program that we're offering as part of our overall programming. It's been really fascinating to follow the development of the program. I know you're in for some really rich learning and some really interesting and thought-provoking conversations, both with your coaches, but also with each other. So do use the resource that you're going to find in the room from your cohort as much as the coaches who will be kind of sharing thoughts and reflections and expertise. So go well for your 4 sessions. If we can help, please do pop us a message in the chat and we shall see you around. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for being here. It's wonderful to see all your faces. I'm going to share a screen now, our first screen, and this is it. Here we are, the Inclusive Cultures multicolored welcome, seminar one. One of our coaches, Alia Altzubi, is unable to be with us this first part of the morning, but will be with us from about 12 for the final half hour, and also working with 6 of you this afternoon, so she will be present. But we wanted, as with all of these things, to set a reflective tone. In the past, over the last 2 iterations, we've used Brave Space, Mickey Scott Bay Jones's address. And in this, we've asked Alia to share her thinking as a welcome for you. Lucy is going to pop the Word document, and this will also be in your folders after the session. So you could read alongside. Or it may be that you just want to close your eyes and just listen to what Alia is sharing with us this morning. Thank you and welcome.
In this space, we invite you to commune with us and each other as we center disability justice. We acknowledge that disabled communities in the UK and across many parts of the globe have daily encounters with systemic violence upheld by disableist principles and ideas, and that these seep into the very infrastructures of our arts and cultural institutions, often in covert, almost imperceptible ways, often in ways that reinforce this quiet violence. We recognize that we are here because systemic violence entrenches itself with ideas of worthiness around productive capacity, ideas that our worth is intrinsically tied up with our ability to produce and self-extract, over our ability to participate, to be together, to commune. We recognize that we internalize these ideas often unconsciously, and that collective and self-reflection is a welcome labor to divest away from these narratives that do not serve us or the earth, our only home. In this space, while we center disability justice, we also sit with a deep-seated knowledge that interdependence is at the heart of our collective liberation. We embrace interdependence with a joy and a pleasure, that we are deeply entwined in a web of connection, that we are rooted to one another and the earth. This knowledge enables us to rewild internal and external wastelands which have been decimated by lack of care, lack of investment, lack of reverence for the gift that is divergence from the so-called norm. At all times, we are committed to intersectional justice to build basic infrastructures that ensure no one is left behind, and the knowledge that intersectionality is as applicable to our external ecologies as it is to our internal ones. In this space, we acknowledge the wisdom of the body. We know that we are so much more than decapitated heads on a screen, that our bodies also sense-make their way through the world and communicate this intelligence to us, though we may have forgotten how to listen. And though we may have forgotten how to listen, we know that this skill passed down from our ancestors remains within us, a seed in waiting for the water that will awaken it. Let us therefore be poised to learn, to find the gift that is self-awareness to unlearn, and to lean into that eternal fountain of relearning. When we meet with difference, let us lean in with openness and curiosity. When we hear that which does not serve us, let us call it in rather than calling it out. In this space, when we invite us all to show up as the best versions of ourselves, we are also asking, what does it take to be here in dignity, safety, and belonging? What does it take to truly commit ourselves to the possibility of transformative change? What does it take to move away from understanding inclusion as paper and pen work towards deeply embodied abolitionist work? And if this work were to start from within us, with each and every one of us doing our own work towards collective liberation, how can we care for ourselves and each other during and after these gatherings? In this space, we commit to rewilding our imaginations in a rehearsal for a future we know we can birth together. This future starts here, now.
Thank you, Alia. Alia will be joining us towards the end of this morning, but cannot be with us this morning from the off. And so, with all of those things in mind, just some thinking, some ground rules, interesting word. Anyone who comes to this space, you're free to use the information from the discussions, but please don't reveal beyond this space, the confidentiality of this space, who has made any particular comment. Do share your own experiences, but not anyone else's outside the session. And we want you to be very active and mindful. Confidentiality by request sort of takes on board the first two agreements. But if you feel that you've shared something that suddenly feels very sensitive, you know, please do request and let us know how you're feeling about that. So we can be, you know, aware of that, what that means to you, and then perhaps add another layer of confidentiality. So reminding people to keep things to themselves within the context and the safety of this space together. So we've heard from Alia, and we've all arrived here this morning in a feeling of a diversity of things at the end of a busy and very hot week. But we want to now do an exercise that involves you all. You might not feel ready, but you might already have some ideas of how you would like this space to be. First, everyone in this space is meant to be in this space. Thank you for applying. It's wonderful to have you all here. We're going to put a link in. I'm just going to stop sharing for the moment, just to get a sense of all of you, to say hello again, to remind you that I see in front of a name of the coaches who are here, and I might introduce us all with a wave. So there's Hayley Williams-Hindle, who's there in the space with us. We've got Rachel Bagshaw. We've got Debs Williams, I think, is also in the space. Across the two screens it is. And who else have we got? We've got our guest Kim Simpson, who was a former coach on Inclusive Cultures, but we're delighted to have Kim here this morning as a guest. It feels wonderful to welcome Kim back into the fold, but I don't think she's left. Yes, so there in the chat is a link to a Jamboard, and you would have been given that link in your welcome instructions. So we're going to share that Jamboard now, and we're going to invite you to share with us what you need, either what you need people to know if you're ready to do so in this space, how you would like it to be, what you would like people to be aware of from your perspective. So it starts to unpack a little bit about the needs that you have, or the desires you have for being, for the communing in space together. So Lucy, are you able to share that Jamboard? Okay, so for those who feel, oh, I haven't been able to access this, and it really isn't easy for me to do so, please do pop things in the chat, and one of the IC team can pop a post-it for you. You go to the left-hand side and you pick up a post-it, thank you for the demo, and you put something there. We've given you some ideas of what others have in the past shared with us over these Inclusive Cultures meetups. Just a hello, just saying hello to each other is really that sense we are, you know, the cut off heads, as Alio was, decapitated heads in the screen, but you know, real reverence around the wonderful things that can happen virtually. So if you have access to the Jamboard, you might add something and share something. It's around maybe looking after oneself, respect, honesty, an invitation to bring as much of yourself as possible, even though it's early days of inclusive cultures. So yeah, let's see what people bring to this Jamboard now. Just have a couple of minutes to do that. Opens. So I'm going to invite Rachel to come in and reflect on this Jamboard.
Hello everyone, it's Rachel here. I am just flitting between different screens, so give me a moment. And now I'm up on the Jamboard, so we're just seeing some things come through. We have got openness, kindness and care focused, friendly, actively listening, self and collective care. Oh, lots coming through thick and fast. I'm just going to committing to attention and intention. I love that. I love the word intention. Grace and patience, connection with like-minded people, time to think. Oh gosh, belonging and overcoming imposter syndrome, compassion and connection, care for yourself and others in the group. Got some moving around, honesty, working to build up others, nourishing, non-judgmental, peace, support for me to be brave, kindness, learning from others' lived experiences, transparency, empathy, connection and support, safe and non-judgment, taking time out, learning, listening, care, a kind space to think about questions you might not yet have the answers to, building resilience, time to think and respond, learning to be my authentic self, inclusive support and connections, honesty and compassion. I think there's still a few more under there. Freedom to get it wrong, absolutely. No stupid questions in this space. Simple language and time to process and think. Patience, I think we've had patience again, and openness. A couple I think I've missed, the supporting and being supported. Joy and laughter, absolutely. I'm going to add playfulness to that, if somebody wouldn't mind sticking a post-it up for me. Lucy, could you do that? Just add playfulness in the space, please. Thank you. And transparency. So just such a beautiful collection there of words, of ideas, of phrases, of requests from the group as well. There's some requests in there. And what I'd just like to ask everybody to do is just in your own time, just to take in everything that you've heard and that you can see on the screen there, and just choose one of those that you commit to bringing to the space. So choose one that you commit to bringing to the space, and choose one that you would like to use as your journey, as what you'd commit to exploring through inclusive cultures. So I might want to say I'll bring playfulness, but what I want to work on is building resilience, for example. So just choose one you're going to bring and one that you'd like to work on through the programme.
Thank you, Rachel. And this Jamboard will be live, and there are several. I know it feels very cluttered now, but we will take some of these things that you said and cascade them over the different pages. And we will also, you know, build the things that haven't been posted or in the chat. We will be doing that also. So thank you, Lucy. If you can bring that down. Great. Whoops, and I will be sharing the deck again. So like those before you, people have shared what it is that they're seeking, what they want to embody, and realise with Rachel's prompt. So this is our seminar 1. This is the shape of things to come today. I'm going to hand over to Rachel in a little while to talk about what inclusive cultures is and isn't. And we're going to then have a 30-minute breakout where you start to talk to a few people about what has brought you here to this point, this morning here as Inclusive Cultures 3. We will have a break at 10:55 for 15 minutes. And then there will be some content and ideas, provocations that we'll be sharing with you. John Kelly, who is unable because he's sick today, we've got a film of his presentation from last year. So very much he's here in the space with us. And then we'll be hearing from Debs about the language of ableism, disableism and more. Another break for 10 minutes and then welcoming Kim Simpson to talk interpolation. And then another breakout before we wrap up the morning with a few things to share about how this afternoon is going to be and what you might need to think about or not think about over lunch, and working with your coaches and coaching conversations this afternoon. And that will be the end of our morning. So I'm going to run the deck and Rachel's going to tell us a little bit about what IC is and what it isn't. Rachel.
Thank you, Sarah. So yeah, just to give us a sense of the framework in which we're working with inclusive cultures, we're going to just talk a little bit about what, as Sarah says, what it is and what it isn't. So we'll start with what it is. If you could give me the next slide, Sarah. Okay, so what it is practically what we have is a set of contact times. So we have 10 hours of these 2.5-hour blocks, so 4 of these 2.5 blocks of seminar space time. And we also have 10 hours of coaching space time, which we'll be spending in the afternoons. In between that, there'll be constant, we hope, constant resource sharing, time for individual reflection, and also that we encourage people to write blogs that can be shared on the Inclusive Cultures blog on Core Leadership website. So a kind of constant flow in between sessions of reflection and information gathering and absorbing. Next slide, please, Sarah. So, excuse me, what is Inclusive Cultures? So for us, the invitation to you is to join in to Inclusive Cultures as a process, an exploration of ideas, of experiences, of some self-challenge in there, as we've seen on our Jamboard. So a process and an exploration. What it isn't, we'll move to the next slide, we say it's not a training program. We're not going to come out with a certificate at the end of this. We're not going to train you, particularly in disability awareness. We are going to bring a load of provocations, ideas, discussion points for us to really kind of chew over and kind of get stuck into over the course of the 4 days we'll spend together and the time in between. And so next slide, Sarah, please. Just to break down the shape of the programme. So as you know, we have seminars, today being our first, seminar 1, in which we'll explore the 6 traits of inclusive leadership with Sarah, social model now with John, some work around language, ableism, disableism with Debs, and as we just talked about, our guest spot with Kim talking about interpolation. July, our seminar 2, we'll move into talking about space, and that will be some time with me exploring space shifting, and also again spending some time with Debs and some guests, Dolly and Charlene, looking at intersectionality and different perspectives. We then have a break over August and we'll return in September for seminar 3, where we'll look at a few different ideas around power. So inner outer landscapes with Talia, a guest from Jamie Bedard, and then some time with Hayley Hindle, exploring neuro-inclusive terrains. Our final seminar in October, the content will be devised by you. It's very much up for grabs. It's 2.5 hours in the morning. We really encourage you to explore what you might want to share with the group, what questions, provocations, insights you might want to bring to each other. And there'll be time there also for some reflections and kind of gathering the resources you need to take you out of inclusive cultures. And what it is us. It's all of us together over these 4 days. It's all of us in contact in our groups in between, if that's useful for people. And yeah, the culture that is inclusive is precisely this. It is this room, and it's us creating and cultivating an inclusive culture within this space whilst we work together. Thank you.
So the breakout question is just one question, and we're going into breakouts now for half an hour. You'll be given a 5-minute warning when we're going to be asking you back. We ask you to come back into the space, if that's okay, and stay in the space as you go into the break. Simple. What brings you here? So a chance for you to start to share with others in your breakout group what it is that brings you here. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Lucy, who has put us into groups and no doubt will be sent there shortly. So if you can join your breakout group now. Welcome back, everybody. We're waiting. I think you could vote to come back to the space. So I should imagine that people will be trickling back in. Already wonderful introductions, conversations, finding out from folks what trajectory that Rachel invited us to follow. Even with the conversation, the people we were in, that changed. Something else became more important. And already provocations within this first breakout space. So we're going to take a break now, and we're going to come back at 11:05. So just under 15 minutes. Please, if you can stay in this space, that would be great. Go and hydrate, eat all the good and bad things, do what you need to do. And I really want you also to vote. If you need to hit the sofa, you need to be in a different state, please do what you need to keep engaged and connected. So see you at 5:05 and enjoy your break. Thank you. Moved to share the deck. And I'm going to take us through, Sarah speaking, for those who've just reconnected, your inclusive leadership. And as part of this, I'm going to focus on the 6 traits of inclusive leadership, which has been with me for at least 8 years, but shifts and changes in what it means to me in and around behaviors and practice. And I am very much of the thinking that leadership is all about behaviors. So this is an interesting set of statistics from Accenture, which is a diversity, inclusion, equities organization. That in 2021, 68% of leaders say they created empowering, inclusive environments, compared with 36% of their employees agreeing that they do so. And I always think this is really interesting. Whether this has shifted, I imagine it's pretty much the same. And that is interesting, isn't it? Because for all your best inclusive practice, it's not going to be any good. Well, it's only as good as the people who feel it and understand it and perceive your actions and your practice to be so. So the 6 traits of inclusive leadership came with edges because it was a Deloitte's model. So there was a lot of suspicion around it, but for me, I've taken it, and because this inclusive culture is very much deaf, disabled, neurodivergent led thing, it has allowed me really to feel my way through it. I hope it's a useful model for you also. So here they are, the 6 traits: commitment, courage, cognizance of bias, cultural intelligence, I like to say adaptability, but that's my spin on it, curiosity, and collaboration. I'm just hearing the pings and dings of people re-entering the space. There's something in the chat, if you can relay, if it's important. Commitment, so I did this graphic. And it's the razor edge, isn't it? Commitment. It's the thing that we don't have time for. You have made a commitment, crafted out some time within your busy lives to be here. And there's often a real tension in that, what it's meant that you've had to drop or put aside. I'm encouraging you to don't let anything rattle you being in this space. Show up. Share that commitment also with your colleagues as a precious, important and vital thing. It's a leadership behavior to say this really is important, because being together, there is alchemy, there is gold. But also a commitment to share your patterns, are we talking too much about how busy we are in the positions we hold? Undoing those behaviors, challenging them within yourself. The pace and pattern, the way you do things, might these be presenting blocks and disturbances for others that you are hoping to work with more inclusively? So leaving you with that. So courage is a second trait. And I think this is a really interesting one, because in this picture, who is the courageous? Who is the courageous being here? Is it the tamer or is it the lion? I see the lion, perhaps, for me, being courageous. I don't see the tamer so much. So in what and different degrees do you, in whatever role you inhabit, and you might inhabit many, in and around your trying to attain or maintain inclusivity, mustering courage to step out, to speak out, to be the one who challenges, calling out policies as being flawed and discriminatory, stopping something in its steps when you feel that it's not right, for all people's best endeavor, investment and all of that, when things just don't feel right, following that within you, responding to that. And also acknowledging, if it's not you, what others are having to take on the labor of challenge. So whether you're being an ally or accomplice, or you're really at the heart of activating, thinking about courage and who is having to take courage, and what are you doing in sort of looking at that in the face of someone having to do. So cognizance of bias, we understand. I like this. It's about the leader that puts their hand up and says, I got it wrong. We understand and know that biases, and sometimes we think, I think there's a predilection of thinking that bias is a negative thing. Not always, because it's a way of us quite naturally protecting ourselves, the way the body and the mind functions. But we do know, and research has told us, that in moments of stress and anxiety, biases are amplified. So self-preservation, but during crisis, this might be that if we jump to our biases, they might be contributing to inequity and exclusion. And we constantly need to look out for when we think biases at play. So again, the courage to call it out, making time and space so that it's okay and comfortable to do that. And if we are challenged for making the wrong decisions, it's about getting over it, moving beyond it, taking action if you need to. So that's in the process of recognizing where you might be biased and where it might be at play. Culture and intelligence, adaptability. I put adaptability because I think it's not about intelligence, it's about awareness. It's about this learning, both in terms of disability, neurodivergent cultures, intersectional cultures. Very much we brought in this time that sense of the earth. We cannot, I think, be making decisions on creating these spaces without acknowledging the earth, both inner environments and outer environments also, how important that is. In the challenging of what are our map of the world, pervading norms, challenging those continuing. Curiosity, already within the wonderful space I had with 5 people before our break, that sense of curiosity, how wonderful it is. Does it mean, quite often I think if we are trying, we the includer, there's a sense of wanting to understand, but curiosity can have a richer, deeper way of behaving and being. So that sense of who is not in the room. Why isn't this working? What am I sensing here about what's not quite right in this? Have I given this enough time? Have I given it enough consideration? So that sense of curiosity is a really key construct of an inclusive practice. And just doing that openly, almost like embodied, modeling that. So I want to stop there and feeling what's not happening here. It allows us to really show our sensitivity, the not knowing, the being unsure. And that instills also a sense of belonging. If you yourself are doing that, others might feel more open and able to come forward and say, yes, this is wrong. This isn't working for me. So curiosity is key. And then collaboration. With all of these traits in mind, working together, collaboration is a richer, deeper, more expansive thing. It's not frightened to have the edges within it, the discord, the disruption. You know, collaboration, when we immediately land on the word, we think of it something, it's all working, but it doesn't have to work. That's part of it. It's about relation. So my question, and this isn't for a breakout, but for your reflective practice of part of inclusive cultures, what of these 6 traits, commitment, courage, cognizance of bias, cultural intelligence and adaptability, curiosity and collaboration are already at play? And where might you focus your energy in developing more nuance and sophistication in that? So when we first started, moving on quickly, looking at inclusive culture, psychological safety was something that was very much of the moment. And, you know, there's a rigor and there's a lot of things that we're going to share with you in our resources. Overall, that sense of listening more, we've already spoken and heard people say, listen, deep democracy, talk less, be in the space, be with the silence, thinking, listening, all of those things. And we'll be developing that very much so in our smaller groups in the afternoon with action learning principles and coaching conversations. Again, this deck will be in your resources, but you've probably heard of the 5 levels of listening. And we're going for 4 and 5. So that sense of focusing on the other as we listen and not what we want to and feel important to bring into the conversation. Empathic listening, the us of it that Rachel shared with us, what it is, what it isn't. It's us. This is us. So the Fearless Organization I would recommend as a really interesting read for what it sort of brings up in terms of behaviors, delicious behaviors that we can explore as inclusive leaders. And there's also a link around what this might look like with hybridity. And it's something I'm really, really interested in, inclusive cultures and hybridity of the moment. So I'm going to be exploring that myself. That's my personal trajectory for our time, these few months together. So just grabbing a few things from this, setting the stage of what it is or what we imagine we might want to include people in. If indeed, and again, I'm saying we, the includers, is that the way we're looking at it? What might we do differently? But framing the work as to why and what the purpose is, and collective, collaborative purpose, so that you are developing the shared expectations and meaning as to why you're doing the work in the first place, beyond, say, an Arts Council directive. Inviting participation in the different ways we heard from Alia, who's not in this space, but inviting us to be here. That sense of knowing one's place, situational humility, acknowledging the privilege, the position we might. The practice of inquiry. So again, how curiosity becomes alive. What does that look like? How does that manifest? How is it being seen? The forums for the input, how and what way you create space to get people to share their thinking. And the guidelines for discussion will instill confidence and ensure that all the voices are welcome, but constantly who is not in the room, who is not in the space. Responding productively. Our productivity, again, this is the challenge within that word, but appreciation, the thank yous, the acknowledging, the destigmatization of failure. That's not to say you can't respond to failure if you need to do restorative work or repair some of the things that have happened, but respond well to breaking of protocol. So if you set something up, a behavior is really important. If you have to break it, make sure you communicate why. So that then will promote safe and continuous working. I'm very conscious, I've gone at that quite quickly. All these resources are for you to reflect upon, and also videos and links for you to watch as well. Just to leave you with action, and again within this group we were already talking about the care at the heart of the process of listening, what you should be listening to, the way you listen, the best time, the action, you know, how to constantly, what is it? What am I going to do? What can I do? And the asking of yourself and others, the time, sensitivity, space, the place. At the heart of that is care practices. So we're now going to hear from John about the social model of disability. It's a video that we're going to play, which is about 16 minutes. And I am going to just move into that now and play it for you. Over to you, John.
Unmute myself. Just give me instructions now to unmute myself, which is great. It even reminds me what I need to do. It's brilliant. So hello everyone. It's lovely to be here with you all this morning. I'm part of the Inclusive Cultures team. Definitely have suffered from imposter syndrome during my journey with the team, but it's been so lovely to be part of it, and I'm learning all the time, and I'm really excited to be on this journey with everyone. I'm a musician, identify as a white male disabled man. I've got a kiss curl on my forehead, I've got brown hair, I'm wearing a blue stripy shirt, and I'm sitting in my lounge, and my TV's usually got a fireplace burning on it, but it was too hot for it this morning, so I turned the TV off. Essentially, what I'm going to do for the next sort of 10 minutes, really, I guess there's a lot of big concepts and principles and thoughts to explore on our journeys, and the social model is something that is one of those principles or understandings that is kind of important for us to unpack, or it's been important for me to unpack in terms of my understanding. So my journey with you will be part personal, but also part from what I've learned from other colleagues and disabled people around me, and I'm really glad to be sharing this with you. The social model of disability ... says my next slide, and the missing word on that is now, because what I really want us to reflect upon or think about is what the social model means to us in our practice. How do we ensure that it's that big word that Sarah talked about, in action? It's not just a theory that sits on a shelf or a book. It's actually evident. For me, it's in my blood. It's in everything I do. It's in every thought I have and how I identify myself as a disabled person. It's clumsy and it's messy and it doesn't always work. And that's okay. I think it's fine to be messy and not to be perfect. But a social model for me was, it transformed my life. So why is it so important still to us as disabled people? So I just want to unpack a few thoughts around that. And I'm going to move on to the next slide. And the next slide reads, if I had a hammer. So I'm a musician and I was privileged to play it. So that the academic who kind of came up with a social model or kind of made sense of it, it was kind of always there, because disabled people were experiencing discrimination, oppression, and still are. So our lived experience is always there. But Michael Oliver, I guess, articulated it, and he's sort of seen as a pioneer and an academic. But he was also important because he was an activist and he was grassroots and he protested. And he said that for the importance for him reflecting on the social model actually wasn't that it was some theory that sat in a book, like I was just saying to you, but actually that the social model is a tool for change. It's not just a set of rigid rules. And he said, like, you know, if I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning, I'd have that. That was the song that kind of he resonated with. And the idea was that the social model challenged the dominant frameworks around disability, challenged the assumptions that are made, and smashed the power structures. And in conversation with Sarah and my colleagues in developing this, we thought a lot about how organisations often espouse the theory of the social model. They say, we have the social model, it informs our policy, it informs our practice. We use social model language. And yet our experience is that it's not always seen in practice. So it's that dissonance between words and action. And for me, the social model has always been about some sort of action. What's been really important about it for me has been that it is ours. It's disability led. It's a really important form of disabled people's leadership. It's something that comes from our narrative, and it's been changed, and we've added to it, and we've evolved models of disability, better placed to reflect our new understandings of intersectionality or impairment or lived experience. So the social model isn't the only model. I'm not saying that this is the only thing we have to think about, but it is a fundamental part of how, a tool that we can use to change practice. Our ways into it have been really, really interesting. This next slide is taken from Paulo Freire's idea of the banking concept of learning. I don't know if you're probably familiar with it, but the idea that you know, that it's a thing that you have to learn. And immediately that made me scared of the social model. I was scared to get it wrong, scared to use and it was somebody's knowledge that had to be poured into my head, and I had to regurgitate it. And that way into the social model, you know, for me, says that it's prescriptive and it's a set of rules, and that's not what I understand the social model to be. So it's not an encyclopedia, although there are loads of books and there are loads of academic writings. For me, it's not a set of books. It's something that I said is in my heart, it's in my practice. It's not perfect. I have to see it, I have to live it, I have to breathe it, and I have to feel it. And yes, this next picture is someone shouting and being angry. And yes, the social model came from the disability movement, and we had to shout, we had to become activists and, you know, share our experience of oppression and discrimination. But the final picture for me really resonated with me in terms of what I now understand the social model to be. It connected me to others, and it was interesting. I'd really like to thank my group that we had the breakout with for helping me to inform this talk, because the main thing that the social model did for me was help me to connect with others and have a shared experience, which is something that Michael Oliver talked a lot about in reflecting on the social model. Was that actually it was about our connection, our shared experience. It wasn't about our isolated forms of oppression and discrimination. It was, oh, actually, this is happening to all of us and needs to change. And actually, when we come together, we are a powerful tool. It also challenged that internalized oppression. It gave me permission to, as we say in inclusive cultures, to be real, to be authentic, and to be unapologetic about my access requirements and how I can belong. So I know that there are lots of views of disability, but I didn't want to make any assumptions, and that's something that we said right at the beginning was really important. So the social model of disability, in essence, this, you know, there are many models, and we haven't got time to break down to them all, but I'd be really interested to hear your views on models that have worked for you in terms of understanding of disability and changing perspectives around disability. But it was developed over 40 years ago, and essentially the social model holds that people with impairments are disabled not by their body, but by the world, the environment, the systems, structures that discriminate and oppress against us. The one model is very internalized and says, I'm the problem. The other model says, actually, it's something external, it's outward looking, it's something that needs to lead to critical action and change. It's systematic. So for me, the social model provides an alternative perspective that is still critical to bringing about our understanding of leadership and transforming understanding. It's about rights and social justice and equality. For me, a critical part of it is that it's actually about now. For me, it's about what has changed that makes the social model still relevant. And interestingly, I was having conversations about over the last 2.5 years, how during lockdown, I suddenly realized that I had a new experience of my own experience of disability, and the barriers that I was facing, they were slightly different. I was faster and able to get to more meetings because I didn't have to worry about traveling. I didn't have to deal with an inaccessible world. And of course, this last 6 months has been so strange. And I went straight back out when I felt safe to do so. Cautiously, I felt like the hedgehog. There's a picture in a show that I did called Human, where I'm a little hedgehog going out with my spikes up to try and protect myself. But I really wanted to get out and be part of that sense of belonging that I'd had 4 or 5 years ago. And I froze and I scared myself. And I realized that what I hadn't really done was I hadn't done any critical reflection. I hadn't rethought what's changed, what's new, based on my experiences over the last few years. So I would open up that idea of critical reflection, not just reflecting on what we know, but reflecting on that reflection and making new sense based on our experience and what's happening to us now.
Just a time check, John.
I'm on my last slide.
Fantastic.
Is that good?
Yeah.
And my last slide is where I've surpassed on all my slides with graphics that I hope will wow you. I've built a bookshelf to share with everyone. It took me bloody ages to build this bookshelf, and I'm going to show you all my books and then I'm going to shut up. So these are some of the books that have helped me on my journey, and they're in the resources, so don't worry about writing them. But I think what's interesting about them is that I recognised as a young disabled man that my model early was shaped by other male disabled people, and yet my leaders were women around me. I was privileged to have studied with Nessa Begum and Millie Hill, and that was really, really important to me to understand my role and issues of intersectionality at a very early stage. So some of the books that I wanted to share with you were just books that helped me. So this one, I mentioned it earlier in my group, Incurably Human by Michelin Mason, a beautiful book which for me talks about pace and space in inclusion. I think a seminal book for me was reading Pride Against Prejudice by Jenny Morris, and in particular the stuff around stereotyping and how actually we internalize a lot of those stereotypes, and we need to chuck them out. We need to get rid of them. We need to challenge them and challenge these dominant models. Understanding Disability by Michael Oliver is a critical book that really articulates the social model. For me, I didn't want to be that angry teacher at the front of the classroom telling people this is what they must learn. And this book helped me with the social model to realize that the social model wasn't prescriptive, but was something that we build with people. It was something that we work together on and we collaborate on. In theatre, I found this working with Augusto Boal was an amazing privilege that I had. In terms of looking at different ways of getting into the social model. And this book gave me some tools to explore with people different ways into the social model. Long Haul by Miles Horton was about building learning communities and engaging in conversation together. It's about music as well, Pete Seeger's and that social music. And this is not a book, but a website, and the link's in the thing, by Michelle Davey, about intersectionality, and in particular in social care. I'm a great advocate for our rights to independent living, and this brings the social model and independent living together from an intersectionality perspective, which was really, really important to me in my learning. And finally, the lovely book, which is really hard to read, and I can't confess that I've got it all, but The Pedagogy of Oppressed, which for me was about saying that if I learn about oppression, I can free myself from it, and I can liberate, and I can become an activist in my freedom. And I think that's, for me, the social model in action. So I'm going to hand back to Sarah. I hope that's been really helpful, and I really apologise if I've muddled things up and got a bit too fast, but I did say it was going to be a bit messy.
That's okay. Thank you,
that was
John.
all right. Thank you.
So that was John very much, and he's got even more books on that bookshelf. So we will bring them all together in the resources for you. But it was lovely to feel him in the space with us. I'm going to now hand over to Debs, who is going to drive the deck herself and talk to us about language, really. Over to you, Debs, when you're ready.
Maybe. I hate this slot. It's like the after lunch slot.
It's before lunch.
Let me finish. I've got to follow John.
Yeah.
It's like, it's really hard to follow John. Because it's such a good, I'm always so intrigued by what he says in that. No matter how many times I've seen it now, I'm always intrigued by what he says. I get caught up in what he says. But hopefully, this will dovetail a little bit of what John had been saying in his presentation just now. What can you see on my? Can you see what version of the deck can you see?
Debs Williams, and then words, language, and terminology. So if you put it on slide share.
Yeah, indeed. Should be that one.
Yes.
There you go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my deep fascination with words, language, and there you go, words, language, and terminology. And I think it's because, as some of what John has just talked about a little bit, is about being told words that we can use, having words being used at us as disabled people, and not really having agency and autonomy and the ability to question and challenge. So this is my questioning and challenging. So the first word I want to talk about is ableism, which I think a lot of people have used today. At least people have used it in my group, and have talked about it a little bit. And I'm hoping that I don't wander off my little script that I have to use as well. But what I wanted to just say about this was, for me, what I find, I've done it again. Ableism is a noun. and it centers, it's in favor of able-bodied people, and it talks about able-bodied people. It centers able-bodied people. So not that I object to it in as a word and people using it, but this is the definition that I found when I was wandering around. It's a type of discrimination in which able-bodied individuals are viewed as normal and superior to those with disability, resulting in prejudice towards the latter group. It's a modern concept of ableism emerged in the 60s and 70s when disability activists placed disability in a political context. Now that is the understanding of ableism from a disability perspective. But actually, in terms of definition, but actually where the root of the word came from, ableism, it was actually from African-American women who were working in professions like construction and long distance driving, truck driving. And they were being told that as Black women, their bodies, physically, they were not able to do the jobs, the work of white men. Ergo, they were not allowed to do the work of white men, to do the physical jobs because they did not have able bodies. That's actually where it came from. And I always remember this because the late, great Tina Turner was one of the people, not to me personally, but was one of the Black women that that was fighting this cause at the time. So in America, when she was in the States, she wasn't allowed to drive a truck. So the first thing she did when she came to Europe after, you know, she left Ike and she left the States, one of the first things she did was learn to drive a long distance truck. And she had a truck, she drove one way into her 60s and 70s that she used to drive around, in particular when she was in France and she was in the UK. So before she moved to live in Switzerland. But, you know, that's where it came from. It didn't come from the disability understanding of the word and the disability definition of the word. It came from somewhere else, and I think we just need to be careful about how we use words and interchange words as we go along, in particular in the art space, because, and as John talked about just now in his presentation, things become prescriptive really quite quickly. So, you know, ableism as a word can become quite actually restrictive, even though it's meant to be an empowering word. And this is an example of how it works or not work when it's driven by non-disabled people. End Ableism is a hashtag that was around online for a long time, and Ally was another one that was actually driven by Microsoft, the Ally one, and they're all lowercase hashtags. But in order for them to be accessible for all disabled people, so in terms of deaf, disabled, and neurodivergent people, and people with screen readers and people who learning disabilities, you need to capitalize your words in order for people to be able to process and digest them. So end ableism should be capital E and capital A ableism, and ally should be ALLY, not A11Y, because readers won't understand that. And now, all it is, you know, this is a modern convention, and it changed, and people were expressing this online. But actually, the disabled people who were expressing this online, they were subjected to be quiet. We're doing something for you. You need to be grateful. So that created a chasm in the online space, which disabled people felt was mainly American, it has to be said, but felt was inappropriate for them to be involved in what were supposed to be ally spaces and spaces for them to inhabit. So this is this an example of ableism? An example of ableism, you have an image from the UK Against Racism Twitter account. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 skeletons on the picture against a black wall. And above each skeleton, you've got white, black, straight, gay, religious, atheist, and then pirate. The first 6 skeletons all have are all full skeleton bodies. The 7th skeleton, titled Pirate, has the lower half of his right leg missing. Is that an example of ableism? And the quote on the tweet is, "Why don't the far right or racists moan about pirates instead?" So that I was going to change it, but I thought, no, let me keep it because I still think it's relevant, and it's probably more relevant now. Is that an example of ableism, or is it an example of something else? So I've had the conversation about ableism, which is one word that's used at the moment. There is another word that's used at the moment, which is disableism, which is also a noun, but that is discrimination or prejudice against disabled people. So it is very much about disableism is discrimination or prejudice against disabled people. An organization has a problem with disableism or a disablist attitude. And what this means, the root of this word and the definition, it is closer aligned to the social model of disability. It is about direct discrimination of disabled people. It centers the disabled person, and it is about discrimination that disabled people are on the receiving end of. So it ties in with the idea that the social model, that it's not the individual or the impairment or the condition that is the problem that needs fixing, that is disabled. It is the environment within which you inhabit, and it is the attitudes with which people treat and think about and talk about disabled people and disability. So disableism is a different word with a different meaning and a different understanding. So let's go back to that same example of the skeletons and so is this an example of disableism? Or is this an example of ableism? I haven't got to answer either of those questions. It's just there for you to think about. When we use these words, then I would encourage you to think of them as separate words with separate meanings and separate understandings, not as interchangeable and either or, which is sort of the position we found ourselves in, where things are polarized and you have to use one word, and if you don't use that word, the heavens are going to open and the sky is going to fall in at you. An example, and I tried to find examples. An example of ableism was COVID. I'm just ending the term on a commission around what started as disableism and race and racism in COVID, an inquiry into that. But what has actually happened is it's turned out that the commissioners have agreed what it was actually was ableism, and was an ableist conspiracy of the last decade. The language used focused on the idea that non-disabled people were superior, and that they were more valuable in terms of their life and what they could offer society post-pandemic and as they went through the pandemic. So all of the communication was targeted at normal and about being normal. All the lockdowns were primarily focused on the safety and needs of non-disabled people. Therefore, a blanket approach, which was the survival of the fittest, was used by our government in terms of COVID-19, and had a devastating impact on disabled people. That was all about the able body, all about being physically able to do things. So disabled people were labelled and valued as in accordance to the value they brought to a normal society, and getting back to normal. All of these terms and all of this language was used. An example of this is how benefits were taken away from people. I've got two screenshots on here. One is of Errol Graham, who the DWP stopped his money. His benefits were wrongly stopped, and because it was a blanket approach, basically he starved to death at home because he didn't have any support or didn't have any help and couldn't reach out to anyone. And then there is also the VAT tax on audiobooks, which is, there's a current petition about this, because of course audiobooks are only for people who because they can't tax books, they want to find a way to tax something. So there's a blanket now tax on audiobooks, which of course means disabled people who not visually impaired people or blind people who use audiobooks are going to be taxed for being blind. So once again, this is an example of ableism, where what the benchmark is an able body and able to do and able and normal, and disabled people are disappeared and lost in the midst of it. An example of disableism is austerity. So disableism, austerity was very much about, it was deliberate discrimination. It took away the planks of support that existed to support disabled people. And, you know, in terms of Equality Act, disabled people, you know, particular protected groups may need additional support. And that's what was in place for disabled people pre-austerity, so what, up to 2010. And disabled people were deliberately presented as taking, and in some cases stealing, and as a result leaving non-disabled people worse off. That was the narrative that came through. That's what it was about. It was a deliberate attack on disabled people and disability. And the example of that, two examples which are ripe now, was the recent image. It was one image, again, two screenshots on my screen, one of Tom Palsgrave, who is actually Minister for Disabled People, going around in a DWP bulletproof vest, bulletproof jacket, raiding people's houses for stealing benefits. But of course, the narrative is all about disabled people taking. But of course, it was the non-disabled people pretending to be disabled, stealing from non-disabled people and blaming disabled people for taking benefits from the space. And then there's the other screenshot is about the story, similar story that was carried on the Telegraph, and that Jeremy Vine on his TV show picked up and said, oh yeah, this is true, that, you know, are disabled people stealing from non-disabled people? Are we, you know, the sick note generation? Are we paying for people to be off sick? It's coming out of our money. So these are just examples of I wanted real examples of distinguishing between ableism and disableism, because they both exist, but they're two different things. So I just, to end, say the word disabled, and be proud of saying the word disabled. Nothing wrong with it, and center it and celebrate it. And then my questions for you as we wander into break and breakout rooms: how do you use language? What are words you like? What are words you don't like? How do you discover the root of your words and your languages? And what is your relationship to terminology?
Thank you, Debs. Thank you so much. So much to think about. We're going to have a shorter break, just about 5 minutes to grab some water or coffee. And if we can come back to start at 11:56, because we've just got over half an hour of our time together, and we'll be hearing from Kim, which will mean our breakout groups will be a bit shorter, because we are absolutely committed to finish at past. But we have our coaching conversations this afternoon to pick up the thinking what's still with us. So have a good break, grab something now, be back in the space at 11:56 to hear from our guest, Kim Simpson. Thank you, Debs.
You see if I okay. How's that? Can you see the film? I can't hear you, Sarah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. Without your notes, all ready to go. Thanks.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm Kim. I am a 40-year-old woman in with pink hair, pink curly hair, and I'm white. I wear glasses. Today I have, well, I always wear a silver nose ring, and I've got big hoop earrings on and a flowery grey, for goodness sake, green and blue leafy top. And I'm actually calling from my office at Creative Scotland today. So today I'm going to share something that I believe and have been using to help me with self-awareness, unconscious bias, and behaviour and culture change, as well as ultimately supporting better practice in terms of inclusion. And that is a concept, interpellation. So it's spelled INTERPELLATION. Now, don't be worried if you haven't heard it. This is not a common term that we use in the arts or in inequalities. So I'll unpack it a little. But first of all, a bit about me. These are both me, sometimes on the same day. I am the head of Equalities, Diversity and Inclusion at Creative Scotland. Prior to that, I was a freelancer working in the industry as a disabled, producer, curator, facilitator and coach, and that's how I became involved in inclusive cultures. And these are both me. They're the same identity. I'm a mad, crip, queer, neurodivergent, working class spoonie. I'm from Glasgow. I grew up in challenging financial circumstances, but very positive sort of family dynamic. And in terms of my professional experience, I've been interested in and working in the area of equalities as part of my practice for some time. Starting with disability, but more recently starting to think about that as just one of many different types of marginalisation, and how my experience might inform or support other kinds of inclusion as well. And this term was really initially about sort of disrupting the idea of inclusion at all and trying to think about it in a slightly different way. Now, my presentation has changed significantly since the first time I did it, and that's partly because, well, for lots of reasons. It's a concept, so my understanding of it changes all the time, and also because Sarah had asked me to speak sort of more from a perspective as, a disabled person who has just gone into one of the organisations and institutions that need to change, really. So this is what my job kind of involves. This is, I will share the slides. These will be available. I think they've been available before as well. And it's not really about the detail, but more to show you the complexity of what our team does at Creative Scotland. We're working across a number of different things. So it can be challenging to start thinking about how you change things when the current picture can feel a little bit complex. I've been at Creative Scotland for 6 months, and I think it's probably fair to say that it's been fascinating, it's been upsetting, it's been really hard, but it's also been a wonderful experience in lots of ways. So back to interpolation. This is a concept that I learned about when I was working on a program for the 17 Institute of Critical Studies in Mexico. They have a disability studies department. British Council had been working with them on the program, and I co-curated it. And it was really, it was quite a task even to understand what the concept meant in order to do that work. And I've been learning and relearning how to use and apply and understand this for around 4 years now. So, and it's ever changing and evolving. So really, it's an introduction today, like spend some time with it and don't worry too much if it doesn't land immediately. So the term interpolation was an idea introduced by a philosopher called Louis Althusser in the 20th century to explain the way in which ideas get into our heads and have an effect on our lives. So much so that cultural ideas have such a hold on us that we believe they are our own. So interpolation is a process in which we encounter our culture's values and internalize them. Now, importantly, this is about cultural values, but it's also about organizational values and how we set cultural value within that context. So apparently I've gone to the wrong place. Social and organizational order relies on people having a degree of awareness in terms of their position and place, so knowing your station, whether cognitively or on a more subconscious level. And tools are required to enact this order. And cultural values, language, and labeling are some of those tools. So interpolation is at play when we're described as individuals, as communities, as organizations, and all of the terms that we use to describe reveal cultural value. And the way that we are hailed or saluted or titled in society expresses our position within it. So if you consider the difference between when we call someone a citizen, or when we call someone a comrade, or when we call someone a subject, these reveal something about the context the person is in. So citizen feels a bit more neutral, comrade feels a little bit more communist or social justice space, and subject suggests that there's a king somewhere. So this tells us about the cultural values and structures that that person is actually existing within. And the key point of sharing this concept is to show how labelling actually works and how it works as a tool to maintain the order we currently have, and how labelling might actually be instrumentalised to disrupt that order. So let's take an interpolation perspective on the term disabled. So for me, this has been really positive in some contexts and not in others. And as this image reminds us, we're still really sometimes battling a very narrow image or evoked perception of what a disabled person actually looks like. So I define myself, as I said, as a mad, crip, queer, neurodivergent, working class spoonie, though almost nothing about my appearance would tell you that if we were to meet, other than the fact that today I have a crutch, but that's because I sprained my ankle. So in some contexts, such as when I was an independent practitioner, this could be really hard to navigate, this kind of perception of disability. But mostly I was working in contexts where this was appreciated and valued. And at Creative Scotland, it can be really positive for the sector to see someone who owns these identities within the organisation. Applicants are usually, or people from the sector are often very relieved when I'm upfront about what my lived experience is. But there are still some places where the terms that we use around disability carry a lot of negative cultural assumption. We can be made to feel that we're being too demanding, our needs are too much, and I wonder how much of that perception actually exists even before hearing what it is that I do need. So someone said something this morning about listening, like really listening. So what we are asking for and what we're given as disabled people don't always match up because of the assumptions that are made in response to this label. In my sort of CLOR fellowship, I did a CLOR fellowship a few years ago, and in the first residency I was very ill and in a long persistent flare-up. So had appeared as disabled and had identified myself as such. And one of the facilitators assumed that my support worker was undermining my agency because they were very lively and enthusiastic. But that wasn't actually the case. Also, one of my cohort assumed that I wouldn't be able to do anything based on my appearance, which he then told me at the end of the fellowship when they realised that their assumption had been totally wrong. And interestingly, in more personal context, I might meet someone who has their own labels, such as church elder or imam, and make my own assumptions about how they'll respond to me. And I might say who I am with less pride, more fear, more apprehension, and a wee lump in my throat. So before unpacking this any further, I want to be super clear in what I mean by cultural values or cultural assumptions. So this is a diagram that shows sort of overlapping systems of oppression, and the names of them are white supremacy, capitalism and neoliberalism, Christian hegemony, ableism, with the awareness that Debs has just brought to that term, colonialism, coloniality, and settler colonialism, and cis-heteropatriarchy. They are some of the most recognisable systems of oppression. That doesn't mean there aren't more. And they're some of the systems that our societies rest on or are shaped by. So some terms that come up in these systems demonstrate interpolation. So let's think about the term people of colour. Can that be anything other than othering within the context of white? It tells us that there's a white supremacy, people of colour. Consumer, or the economically active or inactive, that we're labelling people in these terms tells us that we live in a capitalist and neoliberal environment. Terms like congregant, worshipper, First Peoples, Indigenous, all of these things are terms that tell us something and tell us what our biases are as well. So what is actually happening here? Well, ultimately, interpolation is about stigma. In an organisational context like mine, there might be some stereotypes around one of my conditions, ADHD, or chronic illness, which I also experience. And even some of these stereotypes might be positive, but they do leave very little room for diversity within certain characteristics. So this can make me feel quite different and separate from the organisation that I work in. For many, labels can be oppressive when we're in a certain context, and we might not always know that we're doing it, but we can all be guilty of dismissing and reducing people socially in response to their labels. And it's this dismissing and gravitation towards hierarchy and order that lead to discrimination. So this slide shows a sort of flow between labeling, stereotype, division, us versus them, lose social status, which becomes discrimination, and in the centre it says stigma. So it's showing the process of stigmatization. The point about interpolation is that if the correct terms are used, as in the most socially acceptable terms, they're allowed, but it doesn't make them any less restricting. So I should also add that labelling is something that comes up in relation to the social model that John was talking about earlier, saying a disabled person shows that the context is disabling and not the person. And stigma is also part of the social conditions around that disabled person. And it also connects back to Deb's points about disableism. So ableism means that we don't account for the labels and experiences at all. And disableism is probably well described with this slide that I've got up here. So I've also been reading a book at the moment called Unmasking Autism by Devin Price, which I thoroughly recommend. And he has just used the term self-stigma in a chapter called Rethinking Autism. Now, we could understand self-stigma to be an effect of interpolation. We might also call this internalized ableism, institutional as well, but internalized ableism, internalized racism, internalized misogyny. We can recognize these feelings and experiences. And what's fascinating about this image, which shows on one side labeling group identification and legitimacy, and then stereotype awareness, stereotype agreement, self-concurrence, self-esteem, self-efficacy. Now you can go back to this and look at it again, but the point is that if we think about the fact that stereotype comes into play with labeling, it shows that group identification can be a powerful way of legitimizing our experience. And we know that the collectivism that comes with this self-identification is a really powerful way to challenge being interpolated. But when stereotype comes into play, it's obvious how this is going to become a problem. So let's imagine that the group identification in this flowchart is disabled people. What do we think comes out in terms of self-esteem and self-efficacy, given the cultural values that the term disabled carries in contemporary UK society? And let's also imagine that the label is leader. What do we think comes out at the end? So ultimately, the risk here is that there's an assumption of stereotype on the part of people who are doing the labeling, and there's an assimilation into that stereotype on the part of the people being labeled. So this shows some strengths and challenges of, oh, did someone speak? No, okay. So this shows some strengths and challenges related to neurodivergence. So again, just an illustrative slide to show that we can frame these things positively or negatively. And this isn't really to limit, this whole conversation about interpolation isn't to limit us from using the language we have available to us, but to understand the power that these labels, these systems and interpolation into them inflict on our own self-perception and the way that we're perceived by others. So what can we do? Well, first, we often can't see how we're being interpolated until something or someone draws attention to it, and that might simply be just by virtue of them being there. So we need more people with different experiences and identities in the room. And the other thing is that we can use culture to challenge stereotypes. So I try to frame every manifestation of my conditions as a strength rather than a weakness. I try to orientate the way that I work so that I'm doing less of the things that exacerbate my condition and more of the things that a condition might be good for. So I'm not overexcited, but I'm enthusiastic. It's not a shutdown, it's a recharge. I'm processing. My pain tells me how well I'm being supported or not. It's not pain, it's a warning light. And my sensitivity makes me excellent at reading culture and reading the room. And the other is to use terms in a way that is about pride, if we have to use them at all. So I opened our staff day at Creative Scotland with this definition of myself being mad, prip, queer, spoony. Now that's not to invite other people to use those terms about me, but to reclaim them for myself. And I did it to reclaim that pride and open up what we mean by the term disabled in the first place. And it's not for everyone to do that, but it's working for me at the moment. And perhaps one day, instead of saying I'm a mad crip queer spoonie, I can just say I am Kim. And this is a great image from a cartoonist called Crippen, who is illustrating the labels that get attached to people who are disabled. So I'm going to do a teeny tiny exercise, and again I would invite you to come back to this because we don't have a lot of time just now, but here are some terms you can see on the screen, and I want you to just imagine, what do you hear when, or see in your mind, or feel about these terms? What are they doing? What are the people who have these terms experiencing? What's their agency? What's their, oppression? A couple of them, for those that aren't able to see, it's the one word would be teenager, or Muslim, or autistic, or refugee, or father. These all have connotations about them. What about this? Chief Executive Officer, participant, intern, curator. So I'm going to leave with some questions, again, for you to think about through your inclusive cultures journey. And the first is, how are you and your colleagues being interpellated? The second is, how does that affect your or your colleagues' behaviour? What impact does this have in your work to promote inclusion? And how can this awareness help you improve that approach? And I will leave it there. Apologies if I've gone over time. Sorry, Sarah. You're on mute.
Mute.
Oh.
Sarah, we're not picking up your audio at the moment. That's Kate speaking.
Myself, can you hear me now? Thank you so much, Kim. So much to think about, and every time you bring interpellation to us, it's the thing that stops us a bit in our tracks. And so wonderful to hear from you, Kim, also within your new set of experiences that you've had at Creative Scotland. So thank you so much. And obviously the film of this morning will be available in your resources to go back. All the slides also, all the book references, including a list of John's bookshelf, and I will find out the additional tomes that he has to share. My feeling is that we don't go into breakouts now. My feeling would be for us to just be together, and for people maybe can share on the chat, or maybe you'd like to sort of raise your hand and share kind of what's with you from this morning. I'm conscious that just to do that and be together is the most valuable thing before I just then spend a few minutes setting up this afternoon. So welcome to pop things in the chat. If you just want to share, because it's nice to hear the voices and see the faces and get a sense of where you're all at. There's a lot of information that we've shared. I hope it's been enlightening. It may have felt a wee bit too much, but hopefully you'll be okay. You are doing okay. Are you doing okay? Yeah, there's some smiles, there's some things. Anybody like to share? So again, pop in the chat any thoughts that you have. I don't want to put you on the spot, Alia, just to bring you into the space as you're here in person.
Thanks, Sarah. I actually wanted to share with everyone, and I was thinking, should I not? But you called me in. So just to say, anyone who's kind of grappling with this concept of interpellation, I remember when Kim shared it with us, was it 2 years ago? I can't remember now, how long ago. And I really struggled with it. So anyone who's struggling to get a grasp of it and to kind of try to, but how is that different to inclusion? Sit with it. it took me a year, I'm not going to lie. It's okay, our brains work differently. And it took me, and I thought I was with these ways of thinking and really kind of immersed in these ideas. But it took me a while to really start to understand the implications, which are really profound. And now I often quote Kim in a lot of my trainings with this concept, because it does change so much about how we frame and approach this whole process of work, and turns it on its head. So it's just to say, for anyone who's struggling with this concept, it's, don't beat yourself up. It'll land.
Thank you, Alia. And also just reading from, thank you for those who are sharing in the chat. Joe, you'd never heard of interpolation. Don't worry, we hadn't before Kim brought it to us a couple of years ago. Lots to get your head around, but again, encouraging, this is a process. This is not just about here when we're together, it's the spaces in between. Alison sharing the power of language and how we're using it, and that link to culture. Where is culture, the pervading norms of culture with these words, and feeling that I want to go ahead with that? Percolation, yeah, that's very important. Just let it sit, as Alia's reassured us, it's not all going to land, or not all going to, and the thing is, it needs to make sense to you, and it's something, you'll go with, and something that you'll not go with. Debs, anything you'd like to say at this point? I just saw you going.
I mean, I think every time like I said, it's the before lunch and after and late night slot that I get, because I come after John and I come before Kim, and it's just like in between so much knowledge and so much to share and think about. I think the thing with me that is really good and I really like is that even just now as Kim was talking, I'm like yeah. And a lot of it resonates, but it goes back as well as forward. So it's not just about, how do I think about this now? But actually, when I remember, 30, 40 years ago and things that happened, and a lot of the ingrained stuff, ways of working that we have, that it's accumulative. It doesn't just happen. And so the dismantling of it will be accumulative as well. And it starts with understanding and appreciation of what it is, and then you can start picking and choosing what of it you want to keep, what is useful, what's not useful, and rebuild your relationship with it.
Thank you, Debs. Thank you. This really interesting what Rosie has shared, and we will share also the chat postings as part of the resources, though obviously we will keep the direct messages as confidential. Yeah, wonderful that it's chiming with research and things that are already happening, Rosie, that you're already pursuing there. They've said, I just use a quote from the Radicant today in a thesis chapter: recognition, the postmodern discourse, recognition of the other, to pasting the other's image into a catalogue of differences. Yep, brilliant. So there's really interesting things that you're bringing up in and around your already on the go inquiries into this. Narratives, ableism, disableism. Yeah, Claire, thank you for that voice that says it's okay. It's okay to not really be on top of everything, to not understand everything right now. Yeah, take time to process. So we are very aware that this first seminar is full, but we kind of need it to be to get you all going, so that you can choose, pick and choose, and go with the flow of your particular inquiries that chimes with the work and the professional practices that you have, the environment that you're in. You can't do everything, but being aware of everything that these inquiries are at play. Yeah. Excitement to learn. Thank you, Rachel. I'm glad that you feel the burn of this, and this is what, the joyful, playful curiosity. So all of those things. Anything around the 6 traits that you're going to go for in more depth? Anything that you might do that you want to share in the chat? Do differently from now, from today. I know, Debs, you always say that you have that spot, that after lunch or whatever, but it always is so great to hear you talk about language in the way that you do. the disableism, ableism, such, you know, clear examples of the difference. So thank you for that for today.
Sarah, I was also just going to jump in and say, you know, when I put any of these things together, they're always a process. Like, this isn't a completed representation of what interpolation is. It's my understanding of it today and yesterday when I put the slides together. You know, the last week, it will change the next time I think about it. But one of the things I mentioned, Sarah, to you earlier, that I came across this image while I've been doing some work recently around how we communicate about equalities, diversity and inclusion, and I'd really like to share it. I think I'll send it to you, and if you could share it with everyone else here. And it's basically an image that has a brain in the middle, and then it has lines coming off of it, and it explains all of the different cognitive biases that we have, like literally hundreds of them. But what's really fascinating is that it splits it into 4 sections and shows what these biases, when they kick in. And they kick in response to feeling that we have to remember something. So we tend to discard specifics and form generalities. We tend to edit and reinforce memories after the fact. The pace thing, so needing to act fast. We're all working in very pressured environments and need to be quick. That's another place where there's danger of cognitive bias coming up, where there's not enough meaning behind something, where it doesn't have integrity, where it doesn't have weight. And then finally, when there's too much information, and I think that's the one to just pick up right now, is that this can feel like too much information, but in that is an opportunity for us to reflect on which of our biases are starting to come up in this space as well, because that is what this space is for, is really to kind of interrogate that too. So I'll shut up and I'll send you the image.
No, that's great. Thank you. That's beautifully expressed. And reflects, you know, the rapidity and the amount of information and experiences that we've shared with you. Just to say a few more things from the chat. Thanks to Alia for giving a abolitionist framing to the entire programme from the start. And again, there will be the Word document of that and a recording as part of the resources. Kat saying, thinking about the social model not as fixed theory, but as a tool for action. And yeah, John, that's all. He has always been very, very clear about it is something workable, a workable set of tools and in different complements also.
And Rachel here, just jumping in on that, and just a sort of, I suppose I've just been really struck yet again by the kind of active reminder from John of the that it's not a perfect model. You know, it's not a perfect theory. It's got its edges. You know, and that it like John, it's like threaded through my veins now, but it's not always the thing that is going to answer. You know, it's kind of got its little challenges and its little quirks.
Yeah.
And to be kind of cognizant, to be aware of those, and that our sense of social model, I think, shifts daily also as the world shifts.
And we'll be talking more about that. I think there's a really interesting thing that Debs will bring in conversation with Dolly Sen and Charlene Salter next time around that, particularly around intersectionality and the social model and recognition within the social model. And also for many of us, that sort of medical understanding by virtue of the fact that, you know, there's often misunderstanding that it's all about society, but obviously there are things we are active within the process, and quite often we need to be able to express medically what's going on for us, and or those sort of ideas and realities. So we're nearly at a close and nearly at lunchtime. I just want to show and share with you one more slide, which sets up this afternoon, 2.5 hours. If you come back into this space, John obviously is unable to host the coaching conversations, but that will be very quickly programmed, hopefully between now and the next session. So yeah, but to encourage you who have burning issue or question, if you have it, to really invite you to be one of the 2 people who will be having be in the middle, be the focus of people's open questions and inquiry to support you, because if there's something burning, let's work with it this afternoon in our smaller groups. Let's do that together. So coaching conversations using action learning principles, roughly trust in your coach that you will find the way. There will be time to establish and create the best space for you. Again, sort of thinking about what's going to work for you as a group. You can revisit why you're here, but also what's left with you from this morning's provocations. So giving some time for that, going through what it is that you're doing, how it works, if it's a new format for you, and then agreeing who will be the two folks who will be in the middle, who will be exploring something that's in and around their professional lives and this inclusive cultures, discrimination, exclusion, anything that's burning for you. You will decide, your coach will lead you through, and you'll feel your way when a break is important. This is just an overview, and you have the whole coaching resource with all the ethic around how we've designed it and how we'd like it to work. And then you'll be maybe thinking a little bit of finding out what you're going to be doing next between now and July, because it's the spaces in between. And then you might choose that you want to continue to be together in your smaller groups, again, in the spaces in between now and July the 21st. So I just want to thank you all, to Inclusive Cultures, but you for being here on this very hot day, engaging with us. It's fabulous to see you in these spaces together. Thank you, Kim, for joining us. It's just so great to have you here as we start this journey together, and have a really great lunch, a good break, an hour and a half. Do all you need to do in order to come back and re-engage this afternoon. So come back to this space for just before 2. We'll get you into your breakout groups, and yeah, see you then. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.